everybody. Happy to be here. Happy to give my little talk on why Agile sucks for planning and how to fix it. I'll go through a little spiel first, and then I'll pull up on the screen some of the kind of planning that I've done, kind of really throughout my career. I started in 1994, I guess, doing this stuff back at a company called Algorithmics. And then I've basically been doing it everywhere since. And had an interesting experience on my last job. I'm with a company called Blue Cat Networks now. Been there for about 9 months. Before that, I was with a company that was super agile, very big A kind of agile. And they used kind of Agile in the most possible Scrum kind of way imaginable. And I thought, well, let's give it a try. I'll do something a little bit differently. They were into the kind of the Agile story points, which I'll get into in a minute. And I said, well, I think I can adapt this. I think I can use it. And it turned out it was an absolute disaster. So I'm not going to do that again. What I really want to talk about is planning and how planning interacts with Agile. So the kind of the most Agile in the small. Now there are bigger, like Lean and things like that, bigger methods as well. I find them very overkill for the most part. But most purists who use Agile estimate the size of things in an abstract unit called a story point. So story points are a unitless quantity. I think you're encouraged when you start out, like a story point should be approximately what one person can do in one workday. I think that's the basic idea. But you're encouraged to very quickly forget about that and disconnect it from anything in the outside world, and rather to just use story points to compare it to other things. So if there was something you previously estimated at 5 story points, and you've done like 3 things that are 5 story points, and then there's this other thing that was 10 story points, and this new thing everyone agrees is halfway between the size of the 5 story point things and the size of the 10 story point things, then you have a vote and maybe call it 7 story points, something like that. And don't think in your head about that's a certain amount of time or effort or anything like that. It's just you're sizing things relative to other things. So then on the other side, you track the velocity of your team. You say in a 2-week sprint, this team can accomplish maybe 40 story points or 20 story points. And then that kind of changes sprint by sprint by sprint, and things can drift over time, and that's deliberate. And it accounts for things like estimation errors. If you make estimation errors, then it assumes you're kind of making the same estimation errors going forward as well as you have in the past, and everything will even out. If there's like extra work days in one sprint and then not in the next, well, that'll even out also over a while. If the quality of your team members changes over time, well, that'll kind of even out over time as well. Usually people will compensate if their team size changes by put like an adjustment in the velocity, something like that. But that's the basic idea, is it basically it drifts over time. That's to be encouraged. So that's relatively okay, I've found, when you're trying to figure out what are we doing for the next sprint. You're pulling stuff off the backlog and you're saying, well, for the next sprint, I think we can do this. And even for the kind of the sprint after that, it's like, okay, I think we know what we're doing about for the next month, say, based on this method. And maybe that's all you need. Maybe you don't need to ever plan longer term than that. And maybe that's even too much. Maybe you don't even need to plan that much. Maybe you're going to go more like Kanban. You just have general agreement of what the next 5 things are in some order that you're going to pull off and start working on. And if all the stakeholders are involved, it's a small team, and you're all driving towards a very common goal, then that's probably the best way of doing things, to tell you the truth, because why plan if there's no reason to plan? But where it falls down is when you've got multiple teams and they're all working on the same piece of software. So say you have like 10 different teams of 5 people and they're all collaborating on the same bit of software. If you're like at Blue Cat, we have two different products. One is a cloud-based thing with a CI/CD continuous kind of delivery model. The other one is big enterprise software that's shipped in appliance form to large enterprises, and that has like a 6 to 9 month release cycle. So you kind of have to plan out what's going into that next release, and you've got about 8 different teams all collaborating on that release. And it's really then not acceptable to not have a good understanding of what's going into that next release. So that happens whenever you have stakeholders who have some interest in where you'll be in 6 months. So for instance, like a sales team says, well, we can sell stuff, but you need to tell us when it's going to be ready to be sold. And it may be a big thing, and you might have to look out over a 4-month horizon or something like that. So in many cases, you need to plan on that sort of longer time scale. And giving just kind of an overall direction, an overall vision is going to be kind of disastrous, because as soon as you give a vision, someone will ask you, well, when are you going to be there? And then you make something up. Oh, I think we can be there by end of the year. And you're probably going to be wrong, because there's zero science behind that at all. So that's where it falls down. And people get super frustrated. Like, it's supposed to create visibility, the whole idea of Agile, but it only creates the visibility in the small with the stakeholders who's right there. It does not create visibility for the CEO of the company. It does not create visibility for your customers, for instance. It doesn't create that kind of visibility that people really want. So how do you fix this problem with Agile? And it's really easy, and it's kind of built into Agile as well. You don't have to use abstract story points. You can use a real unit for sizing. So I've always used throughout my career, like, as I said, started in planning things like this in 1994. I think the Agile manifesto wasn't until 2000 or something like that. We were always Agile. We always, like, the opposite of Agile is you write a giant specification, like 400-page specification. This is what's going in the next release. And then someone signs it and says, okay, this is what you're doing. And then you do all the coding associated with that. And that doesn't work, right? That's called the waterfall process. The first guy who ever mentioned the waterfall process in an academic paper, a guy named Royce in 1972. And that's the reference. I did a PhD in software engineering, so I had to write papers, and I referenced waterfall. So I referenced Royce. But I never read Royce, and so that's bad for an academic to never read Royce. So I eventually read it, and I was surprised to find that the first mention of the waterfall process in the literature was by Royce, and it said why it doesn't work. So the very first mention of waterfall was, this is why waterfall doesn't work. And the reason is because of the feedback loops that happen and that destroy everything. But however, waterfall got kind of, the military and big businesses said, well, that makes sense to us, so let's build software that way. And then it just became silly after that. And so hence the counter reaction, which was Agile. Anyways, like I say, always been Agile in the sense of being able to dynamically and quickly pick what thing is going to go into the software when. But we did need to plan on a larger time horizon. So the key to it is pivoting from abstract story points to a real measurable unit. And the ideal day is the only alternative you have. So an ideal hour-based estimate, although when you're dealing with bigger features, I just scale it by a factor of 8. And the reason it's 8 is because 8 is easily divisible by 2 and 2 and 2 again. So the unit is the ideal day, basically. And that's kind of 8 hours, solid hours of coding a new feature in the next release. So it's not like someone reports a bug from the field and I go and I look at that and I figure out what's going on and I fix that and I create a patch and I push it out again. That's not included in your ideal day. Your ideal day is, I'll grab a story for the next shipment that we're putting out, and I'll start coding that. And I'll do some testing myself to make sure it works. And I'll write some unit tests and add those in as well. I might even add some system level regression tests in. I'll do all of that. I'll convince myself that it works. And then I'm done. I'm decut. I'm development complete, development cut off. So that's the time spent doing that is the is what I call ideal days. And you need to size things in these units of ideal days. Now, what an ideal day is really a combination of three things. It's the inherent size of the thing you're working on. And there are no good units to describe that. Like lines of code is a stupid unit to describe that, because sometimes really good work is negative lines of code, right? Removing stuff. There was an attempt to do something called function points, and that kind of really didn't work out very well. There's no good unit for expressing how big a piece of knowledge work is. It's not like if you work at McDonald's, your unit of productivity is the Big Mac. So, you can count the number of Big Macs produced per hour, and that's how productive you are. But for software, there's no equivalent unit of the inherent size. So the ideal day mixes in the inherent size of the work item, an estimate of who you think is going to work on it, and an estimate of how productive that person is going to be working on that thing. So it's an ideal day estimate is a combination of those things. So if you think like Brittany is going to work on this story, and it's going to take 5 ideal days for Brittany, that's like 5 times 8 is 40 hours of solid coding for Brittany. And then for some reason, Brittany's working on something else, and you got to put Sam on it. And Sam is like not as good as Brittany. And the estimate is going to change from 5 ideal days to say 8 ideal days because of that. Well, that was just an estimation error. You estimated the wrong person was working on it, and you have to adjust the estimate when new information comes in. So that's the ideal day estimate. So you estimate all your features in ideal day units. And that doesn't change Scrum very much. It doesn't change Kanban much at all. You don't need Agile, these kind of abstract story points. You can do everything in ideal days. It's built right into Jira, for instance, that you can do that. It's built into most tools that you can do that as well. Beside that, what you also want to estimate is how many ideal days each coder can get done in one workday. So what I've observed is the typical is something around maybe 0.5 or 0.6. I call that the work factor. So a 0.5 work factor means that as a developer, you can do 4 hours of that kind of coding in every workday cycle. So your work factor is 0.5. I've seen work factors of like 1.2, like sustained guy who gets in at 8 a.m., doesn't leave until 6:30 p.m. and codes the whole bloody time. I've actually seen that sustained. It's kind of rare. He was pretty dedicated though. Anyway, so you come up with a work factor for each of your coders, and some of your people, like your team leads or your architects, the amount of actual real coding that they do is going to be pretty small. So their work factors may be 0.2 or 0.1 or something like that. My work factor is 0, unfortunately. So but so generally it's the non-zero people you actually care about. So you estimate their work factors, and then you can kind of have a plan. If all your features are in ideal day units, and you estimate how many ideal day units, you know the size of the team, you know how long they're going to work on this. So you establish a planning horizon. So for a release, that's like, when is the next big release coming out? If it's continuous delivery, it's just a business horizon. Pick 6 months. What are we going to get done in 6 months? People really want to know what that is. And it's a real detail about the order in which you ship things out the door. You also have to account for what I call stabilization time. So I mentioned that the ideal day unit is you start coding on something, and then you stop. And when you stop, you say, I believe it's correct. I believe I've done all the testing I can. I've added in all the unit tests. I'm 100% sure that this is going to work. Now, that's kind of a junior developer will say that. Anyone with a bit more experience knows that as soon as the first person tries out the feature you just wrote, they're going to find a bug. It's like, unless it's trivial what you did, which, by the way, that's the definition of trivial for coding, is that there are no bugs. so there's going to find a bug. And that's really hard to estimate how long it's going to take. If your definition of done kind of includes getting all those bugs out that are found by other people who are trying your stuff out, it's really hard to estimate how that is. So don't even try. Estimate the dedicated kind of work. and then use kind of a ratio method. If your team is working for 30 work days doing feature work, then there's some ratio, like maybe 1/3. So maybe reserve 10 work days of that same team working at the same intensity to get all the bugs out. And that can either be spread out or more concentrated. It all depends. But regardless, there always has to be this notion of the stabilization time. And the reason it's not part of the estimate is it pulls developers off. They're going to be working on the next feature by then, and this will just be a kind of an interrupt-driven thing that hits them after that. So you got to account for that somehow as well. So using all that info, you can kind of make a plan. And I'll show you a couple of these plans in a moment. But I just want to point out that when you make a plan of what you intend to deliver over a 6-month period, it's not a commitment. And the company has to really understand that it's not a commitment. As soon as it's a commitment, you're on what's called a death march. It's not going to work. The commitment you're making is to manage the uncertainty in a plan like that in a very responsible fashion. So the plan becomes an accumulation of knowing more and more, of removing more and more uncertainty. So at the beginning, before you even start one of these planning horizons, you like say size 100 different things you could work on, and you're super rough. 50 ideal days, 20 ideal days. You got to make the coders kind of figure this out. You say, okay, well, how big is this thing? Well, we can't possibly know. We need to spec it out in detail. We need to completely do a work breakdown. Say, no, come on. How big is it? Is it 100 ideal days? And they say, no, it's not that big. Is it 20 ideal days? Oh, are you kidding? It's not that small. Okay, what is it? 30? Can I put down 30? No, bigger. 40? Okay, 40. So you put down 40. Boom. And you move on to the next one and the next one and the next one. So you have a lot of uncertainty in your feature sizes at the start. You then go through the cycle where you decide what things can fit within the 6-month period. And then you do some refinement on the things that are left over, and you kind of go into the next level. Let's spec it out a bit more. Let's do a bit better for sizing. Eventually it's assigned to someone. That person starts working on it. They should re-estimate the number of ideal days remaining as they go through. And so everything becomes tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. And so you kind of have this notion of converging accuracy as you get closer and closer to it. But at any given point, you have a plan, and it's converging to more and more accuracy as you go through. So as soon as some new information comes in, like a developer leaves your team, you know the impact of that right away. Or as soon as you learn that a feature is going to take a lot longer than you thought, you know that right away, and you can react. You can either remove features not yet started, or you can reduce the scope of features, or you can choose to move the date of the end of your horizon. If it's like a release that's going to go out on a certain day, you can choose early on to move that date if you wish. So there's various things you can do to react to that appropriately. And the final thing is you want to close the loop. So you want to have the coders tracking their effort. Again, in Jira, there are plugins that allow you to update the time spent and then re-estimate the time remaining. And by time, I mean ideal time, ideal days spent, ideal days remaining. So if you update that, then you can get feedback for each developer. What is your work factor actually? What is it really? And then you can have a discussion with your manager. Well, this is way too low. I want it to be higher, but I'm being pulled in 18 different directions. So what can we do to get me more focused, for instance? And usually people's estimates of their work factors are way higher than their actual work factors, and that causes a real problem in planning. And you can also go back on your estimates. Like if you estimated a feature to be 10 ideal days and it came in at 12, that's pretty good. No need to even look at that in a postmortem. If you estimated at 10 and it came in as 30, it's very entertaining in the postmortem to look through the time series of estimate changes along with the little reasons entered in and see where it went so off the rails. And in any given plan of, say, 30 different things, there's at least 1 or 2 that are going to be like that and going to just completely blow up. And it's good to be able to retrospect. So let me share with you now some of my plans. I got to figure out how to work this thing. Where is this? Sorry, I'm just trying to. get this on the screen. Where's Excel? Got to show the window. Okay, share this again. Application window, that one. There we go. I am hoping you can see a spreadsheet. Can someone just say on the chat, can they see a spreadsheet?
Yeah, Dave, we can see the spreadsheet.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, you can talk. That's fantastic. Okay, good. So this is a Horizon plan. This is the one we're currently working on in Blue Cat. I've removed the names of the developers. Can you see my mouse as well as I move it? Okay, good. So these are, I've removed the names and I removed the actual names of the summaries of the features. I got their JIRA tickets here, but this is a typical kind of plan where the start of development was April 6th. This is the plan as at May 4th right now. We plan on being decut, that is all the developers believe that they're completely done on October 30th. And then because there's like holidays and stuff like that, and we've got a stabilization period where we're going to plan on making it generally available on Jan 29th. Every date subject to change. I need to say that. So our work days remaining until development cutoff is 130. So you kind of, there's a little function in Excel, you can count up the number of work days and subtracting out all the vacations, things like that. And the capacity is 1,280 ideal days. And this is, you know, so you look, there's various teams. There's the Grumpy Cats, the Epsilon, the Cool Beans, Night Links, Footprints, Beetroots team, and these are all the coders on the team. This is the amount of vacation that they intend to take. It's an estimate of the vacation. We've asked them, how much vacation do you intend to take? And this is their self-estimate of their own work factors. And then you basically take the number of days remaining, subtract off their estimated vacation, multiply by the work factor, come up with the number of ideal days available and add them up to get to 1280. So that's one side of your balance sheet. The other side is we divide into what's called an A list and a B list. And these are all the features that have made the cut, basically. So these are the JIRA links to those things. This is, some of them are already underway, some of them are not yet started. And this is the number of ideal days remaining across all of those features by the same token. And we just update this thing constantly. Every week it gets updated. And we have a meeting every couple of weeks to say, hey, where are we at? We've also got kind of a B list of stuff down here as well. And so we in looking at the plan, you say, okay, well, for the A list, we have 966 ideal days against a 1280 remaining. So our delta is 314, which is good. Any positive number is good. So we're using 75% of our 1280 capacity. If we combine the A and the B list, we're in a hole of 181 ideal days, or we're using 114% of capacity. And that's shown on this graph over here. It's kind of the burn down graph. As we're projecting, we're going to lose capacity over time just because of the number of days. The work days is going to decrease through time. And this is the A list. Hopefully it'll stay beneath the blue line, and we'll ship at the end of this with all the A list features and some of the B list features. But we can kind of eat into the B list if we want to. Or the team could go over the top and deliver all the A list and the B list. I've never seen that happen, but that would be fun if it ever did. We'd reward them with donuts and the promise of more donuts. So if they did that. Let me show you another one now. Okay, I think I have to end that. I think I have to now share another one. It scales up to be really, really big. So I worked as a vice president in a part of IBM at one point called Risk Analytics, and we had a lot of coders. These were all the coders, lots of them, and they were all spread out all around the world, and they were working on all sorts of different projects. Yeah, so there were a total of what, 132 of these people. These were all requirements, the stories they were working on or intended to work on over the next horizon. So that's, I think, about 600 of them, something like that.
So sorry to interrupt you, Dave. Saying that you're running a little bit over time, so you've got another 2 minutes.
Perfect. It's exactly on plan. So all sorts of different little horizons, products, and shipments of those things as well. And at the end, I've got kind of a dashboard that says, well, where do we sit on all of these things? Are we green? Are we red or not? Something like that. So my point is, it's scalable across from very small teams to very large teams, and it solves this problem that you get with Agile, and that you don't have this larger visibility, the 6-month visibility across multiple teams. It's a really, really easy way to do it. I attribute this method to any success I've had as a manager is because I've done this every time. It is kind of your job as a manager to do this. It almost defines a good portion of your job, to have a handle on what you're working on and when it's going to be done. And as things change, adjust. And so I've had a lot of success with that. You can still use lots of Agile stuff at the team level. And as long as you shift everyone to using ideal days, which is really critical, then everything will nicely aggregate, and you can do that longer term planning as well. And I will also encourage you as professionals to track your time that you're working on. Don't track when you come in the morning and when you leave and when you're having a coffee break. Just whenever you're working on a feature, you're doing that kind of ideal work, track that work. Because it's really enlightening for you as a software developer to understand how long things take, how many hours do you really have in a day to work on stuff. When you estimate something takes so long, are you on or are you off about that? And they can really close the loop, and you get better really quickly at doing that. So thank you for listening. That was my little spiel on why Agile sucks for planning and how to fix it.
Thanks so much for the really interesting talk, Dave. If anyone's